Let's talk about this now with Swaran Singh, who's in New Delhi. He's a professor of international relations at Jawaharlal Nehru University. Professor, it's good to have you on this news hour. So when it comes to Russia and North Korea in this particular situation, who needs more who? Sorry, who needs more, between the two of them? Russia needs weapons, North Korea needs food.
As your program has already outlined, clearly both countries need each other. Russia today is not just fighting a war with Ukraine. Russia is fighting a war with much of the Western countries together supplying weapons and other humanitarian aid to Ukraine. In Warsaw speech earlier this year, President Joe Biden had mentioned having raised a coalition of about 50 nations that are supporting Ukraine in this fight against Russia. So Russia has also to choose, and it doesn't have too many suppliers in that sense. And if North Korea has any sector which can be called advanced, even if its defense sector is often described as dated and poor, it can potentially think of defense exports as a possibility. And Russia, in such a need of continuing war against Ukraine, would find that they will like to take any weapons from anywhere they can procure. So, particularly ammunitions, anti-tank missiles, all kinds of usable weapons on the ground is something that North Korea can perhaps supply to Russia. And of course, they then, of course, have much complementary relationship of whether Russia will supply food grains to North Korea or North Korea will get some kind of assurance of regime security. And that complementarity is something that will grow in the long run, but they already have a close strategic cooperation, as was underlined in Putin and Kim meeting of 2019. So I think there is enormous complementarity, but of course, at the same time, remember there are enormous pressures being put by the United States, and we heard National Security Council spokesperson even warning North Korea of action, which at least could include more sanctions, invoking that somehow during the meetings between President Trump and Kim Jong Un, North Korea had promised not to supply weapons to Russia, as was claimed by spokesperson John Kirby of United States. So that Kim Jong Un will have to take into consideration as to how will it address those very strong warnings and pressures from United States.
Professor,
Otherwise, there is complementarity.
what does it indicate rather from Russia's side that it is now in a position where its defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, traveled to Pyongyang not that long ago? His first visit to that country since 1991. What does it tell us about the state that Russia is in, that it has to go to North Korea, a country that is a veritable pariah state?
Clearly, I think this is not an era of prolonged wars. Most nations don't imagine that they will be involved in fighting an actual ground operations like this for as long as 18 months and more. So naturally, there is now a need for Russia to explore other suppliers of defense equipment which are in use on daily basis in these military operations. So wherever it can access, it will go. And Russia obviously doesn't have too many countries either in position to supply or willing to supply defense equipment to Russia. Iran has been one possibility, to some extent maybe Turkey, but now North Korea is apparently a country where Putin thinks he has a certain leverage to sort of ensure that military supplies can be procured from North Korea. So it's fundamentally this, dealing with the reality which was not really anticipated that war will go this long. But whereas Ukraine has, large number of suppliers of defense equipment and humanitarian aid backing it, as I mentioned, as many as 50 nations were mentioned by President Joe Biden in Warsaw speech. Russia doesn't have too many suppliers. So in that sense, it is understandable why it will go, even to invite Kim Jong Un to have a meeting with President Putin and then, put this at center stage that Russia today wants military equipment from Kim Jong Un. And Kim Jong Un, of course, also looking for satellite technologies, for nuclear submarine technologies. all kinds of advanced technologies that
Yeah.
potentially Russia, if Russia is willing and is able to procure from Russia. So there is a complementarity, but also pressures from the United States.
Yeah, and a lot of concerns, of course, for South Korea and many countries in the West about that. Professor, good to speak to you and get your analysis. Thank you so much.